As part of the Holland Park Transformation Project, we are conducting a series of interviews with people who actually attended the West Ward School that was located in the center of what is now Holland Park. So to begin, why don't you state your name and tell us when you went to West Ward School?
Okay. My maiden name as I was growing up was Betty Smith. My parents were James Smith, Anna Mae Hughes Smith. I started in 1946. Back then I was 4 years old. And since my birthday was Christmas, it was beyond the time that you could go into, school. So you could take an exam back then, and then you could go. If you passed the exam, reading, everything, you could go. So I was 4 years old when I started. And I went through, and I remember my teachers, Miss Biggs, Miss Stewart, and I believe Miss Holmes was, and I'm thinking that she was the principal. Yeah. And then there was Horace Hall, who was a custodian.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And I went there all the way up through the 6th grade, and then I went to junior high. I never went to Dalrymple or any of the other schools.
Okay. Did you also have Mrs. Ferguson?
Yes.
Okay.
I knew it was one I forgot. Yes.
Okay.
Very much so.
And you had brothers and sisters? Did
Yes.
any of them go?
All of them went.
Oh, okay.
Except for the youngest,
Okay.
There was like 6 years difference between him
Right.
and the last one, so he was one of those that went to Dalrymple.
When you went to actually walk to school, did you walk with your brothers and sisters or other people in the neighborhood?
Since I was raised on Washington Street back then it was my grandfather's house, but when he passed on, he left it to my mom. And so I walked 2 blocks to school. So that was a real long walk,
Yeah. Okay.
But I did walk with him.
Okay. Why don't you talk us through, as best you can remember, what a routine day in school, what was that like for you? And what kinds of things did you do?
In a routine day, and vaguely remember, like kindergarten, 1st grade, that kind of stuff. But as we got into the grades like 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and going on, where you were learning how to write properly, learning to read, learning to spell. And one of my best things I loved was spelling contests. I really liked that. And I love history. And it's amazing how it's still in me to continue on in history as much as I have. A day after I was older and was in some of the higher classes, like the 3rd grade, and we would have safety patrol. And I was in safety patrol. I was kind of tomboyish, so it was nothing for me to want to play ball or to have outside activities with my older brother. But as far as we didn't have languages or anything like that. But one thing I can say, we had some awesome teachers, because when you left that school, you knew you were ready to go on to the next level. So, and it was amazing for some people to know how well we were educated, because there was too many assumptions back then,
Yeah.
We're going to all black schools, so blah, 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 we're not going to learn or have the teaching that we had back then. It'd be good if we had it today, but it's a little bit different.
Yeah.
But as far as math, spelling, geography, I don't remember us having a science class. I don't recall.
No. What about other classroom activities or special events? Do you recall any of those? Maybe something associated with a holiday or anything like that?
I'm thinking that we had some plays or some programs, you know, and that part is kind of vague, because I used to get in trouble now. I had my share of that. Because I was more, I guess, growing up with two brothers that were close. I was closer to them because my sisters were kind of like, my older sister read a lot. I would be outdoors like with my older brother, Jimmy, and I'd be shooting marbles or roller skating or trying to learn how to ride a boy's bike or something like that, and always getting in trouble. But as far as school, I think I love recess.
Okay.
It's like getting out, you know, and the playground equipment that we had back then, they were so much more fun and different from what we have today. And I think too, because they look at it like, if they look at it today, they'd say, well, they weren't quite as safe as what we have today.
Do you remember the actual pieces of equipment?
Well, there was a big old slide, I mean, that one was much higher than the ones we had today, but there was a merry-go-round and you held on and everybody ran.
Yeah.
And then you'd be like you're flying.
Yeah.
And your legs would go up and you just go around in a circle, and that was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
At recess, do you recall smelling like odors from the Gale or even the Malibu or stuff in the air being a problem at recess?
You know, I don't recall it ever being a problem. I knew that they had certain times that they would open the windows, and then other times they did not open the windows because of the what do you call it, the dust, the fumes and everything coming in. The soot,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that you were tomboyish and every now and then you got in trouble. Do you remember discipline in the school itself and what that consisted of?
My discipline that I used to get in school was a ruler. And she would either, and Miss Biggs was the one. I'll always remember Miss Biggs, she was the one that I would always get in trouble with. And then she would say, okay, come over here and sit by my desk, or sit in the corner up under the desk, or, you know, because we didn't have timeout chairs or anything like that.
Right.
So you were there. And my parents would know that I got in trouble before I got home. And then you got in trouble again.
Right.
Mhm.
Okay. What impressions did you have of other staff, like Miss Holmes was the principal?
Mhm.
What impressions did you have of her or Miss Ferguson? Or you mentioned who the custodian was. Did you have any interaction with them at school?
You know, all of us really liked Mr. Hall, and he would be out either in the building or either out in the yard where he maintained all the yard and everything. And I can remember we would go out and we would pick up papers and stuff if there was, and that was one of our things that we would, you know, at recess or whatever, you know, and we would pick up, you know, like papers that kids would throw down or just blow in the, you know, up on the schoolyard.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What about outside of school? Did you have any interaction or contact with your teachers in some way that was not connected with school?
I believe that a couple of them went to the same church we all went to, because we had a huge Sunday school class. And if I can remember, and I might have a photo of the first black church, which was down on the corner of Cass Street
As a Culver.
in Culver.
Yeah.
And we would have after school activities down there because we used to have a pretend church for the teenagers. I mean, us coming up. And Mrs. Bell, Floyd Bell's mom, she would be there with us. And Edith Woods would play the piano.
Yeah.
Joan Sanders, Gloria, Jackie Hall, Beverly and them after they moved into the neighborhood. We would all go down there, and my cousin, his name was Joseph Reese, we used to call him Bummy, but Joseph Reese, he was our pastor. And we had a choir, and then we would have, a best old church. And Mrs. Bell just loved it because she loved the music, and she would always be there as, a person that watched over us.
Mm-hmm.
But she looked forward to the services too we had.
Yeah, that's bummy.
Mm-hmm.
What about within the school, visiting teachers or student teachers? Do you recall somebody coming in from the high school to teach music, or teach art, or college students coming in, or you going up to the college for some activity?
We used to. And one person that sticks in my mind was Ruth Holland. Because when she was up at the college, she would come, and then there was other, you want to call them students, or just, they would come up and they would share stories with us and help us with homework if we needed help. They volunteer their time. And then they would have different programs up at the college where they would come and they could take us up there and then bring us back. I remember walking, but nothing, we walked up to the college. We never thought anything of it now, back then. It was, walking was just a natural thing for us.
Right. So, do you recall going to a play or anything at the college? Some performance at all? Anything like that? Okay.
Not right off the bat.
Okay, within Westport, for Halloween, Thanksgiving, what kind of activities, if any, do you recall associated with that?
I remember we would have little plays, and in the plays, and I remember Thanksgiving more than Halloween, and in the plays, each one of us would have a part, and I can remember the making of the little hats or, paper garments or something that we put on. And I can even remember, with my parents, I remember my mom, she was a great baker, and she would always send cookies or something. Our parents would bake things, and then we'd bring them up for holidays or something like that.
Right. What about, you talked about recess a little bit. And did I ask you about the trees? Do you remember the trees on the school ground?
There was trees near the front, the side towards Cass Street, and towards Dalrymple Street,
Yeah.
and also towards Washington, when it was Washington all the way through.
Right.
Because on the Alvin Street side, there was baseball, softball. I would say softball for kids, but there was a little softball.
Diamond?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking on the Cass Street side, wasn't there a little basketball?
the basketball, that dirt surface, that was also on the Washington Street side.
Okay.
Yeah,
Cause I can remember them being there.
yeah.
Cause I couldn't play basketball. I didn't wanna go out in the field because, softball because I got hit with the ball. I said, that's it.
Let's see, safety patrol, and think groups like that in the school. You were in that?
Yes. In the cold days, winter days, when it was so cold, we would go in, or either they bring us in and we'd have hot chocolate or something to warm us up.
You remember what corner was yours?
I'm thinking the corner of, Washington and Dalrymple.
Yeah, I think they tended to put us on a corner towards where we live. Yeah, okay. In 5th grade, I recall there was a camp, a 5th grade camp, over near Battle Creek at Clear Lake. Do you remember going to 5th grade camp, or even talk about it and not going?
I know there was talk of it, but my dad would never let us go to camp.
Okay. What about activities with students from other elementary schools? Were you involved in anything that would connect you with kids from Austin or Dalrymple?
Back then, no.
Okay. You mentioned hot chocolate. What about lunch? What do you remember about? Did you go home for lunch? Did you stay at school?
In the younger years, we went home for lunch. And then later on, they would have like soup, crackers. I can even remember sandwiches at one time.
Oh, really?
Okay.
Okay.
I mean, it's small.
Yeah,
You
but-
gotta
and
have
they were
a sandwich
served,
and
they were
bowl of soup.
served in the school?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Talking about the school building itself, how do you remember it? Like, was it cheerful, bright, gloomy, hot, cold, comfortable, uncomfortable?
I think it was comfortable. It wasn't gloomy to me because, when you're a kid, and it can be the gloomiest room in the world, but when you got your friends and classmates, everything is bright,
Yeah,
and cheerful. And I remember that part well.
okay. Did you ever notice anything about the physical structure of the building itself that needed fixing or repair of any kind?
I remember a couple times when we were there was repairs going on.
Okay.
I can remember once they put a roof on. It was like there was a leak in the building or something, and they had, that was repaired. And I think there was something else they repaired, but because we had to dress warmer in there, before we could go in that area.
Was there a coat room and a place for your coats and boots and all that?
Yes, there was.
Do you remember where they were located?
I'm thinking we came in the front door because on the side door facing Washington Street, there was stairs going down, and Mr. Hall used to always go in and out that way, and then there was another stairs that went up. And when we went in, there was like those little hooks that each person in your boots was lined up, just so.
Do you ever, I recall at Halloween, one year at least, they took one of those cloakrooms and they turned it into, that was where all the spooky stuff was. Do you remember anything like that? I mean, the
Like
scary
ghost-
house, it was like the scary house.
Uh-huh.
And they converted a cloakroom into that.
cause my brother was in there, and he was devious.
Jimmy?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And, we would go home and say he did such and such, but he beat you up before you got home to tell it. But there was that, and I don't know who all worked in it, but I remember he was in there.
Okay.
Hmm. And I wasn't going in any place he was.
Okay. Did you ever, you mentioned on the Washington Street side that Mr. Hall would come up, there are stairs going down
Mhm.
and there are stairs going up. Did you ever go into that basement or see into the basement and what was in there?
A lot of his outdoor equipment and stuff was down there. And once when LaDon got sick and we had to go in, run in there and get him to bring him out so,
Mhm.
you know, he could take care of him.
Yeah.
But that's the only time I was ever down in that area.
And you don't recall like a safety patrol meeting that was in the basement? Or do you recall safety patrol meeting someplace else in the building?
I don't remember going downstairs for safety patrol.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the books. Do you remember anything about the condition of the books that you used to get?
They were always used. I don't remember us ever having any
Brand new?
brand new books.
Okay.
Mhm.
When it was getting in around 1951, I guess, were you aware of your parents being talked to or discussing conditions at the school, either books or a lack of maintenance or anything like that leading up to the actual closing of the school?
You know, my dad and mom would talk about things like that, but and I guess too, I was brought up in a strict area when adults are talking, you know, kids are not around, you know, go play. That's the magic word, go play.
So you didn't.
Yeah, I didn't hear what the conversations were, you know.
Do you have any remembrance of when the school was closing that would have impacted your younger brother and sister? Like
That would have been Gail.
Gail, yeah.
And I think Gail went to Austin School.
Do you know if she started that year? Did she start in West Ward for a few weeks, or did your parents keep her home before she made the move?
I think she was there for a few weeks before they made the move.
Okay.
Mhm.
So when you transitioned to junior high and left West Ward, were you comfortable making that move? And did you feel,
We were harassed when we made the move,
okay,
and people would go by sometime when, you know, then they didn't have the lunchroom up there, so we walked home for lunch and then would walk back. And I remember with this one man, and he was in his car, and he drove by one day and he was just calling us names and why don't you go back where you come from and all this kind of stuff. But we told the parents, and then, you know, it didn't happen again. But you know, you're innocent kids,
right?
and when I was coming up, there was Polish family, their name was Post. And there was James and Janice that was twins, and then there was Sonny and Eleanor. And we would go over to their house, and we all lived, you know, down by the Kalamazoo River in the cul-de-sac. We used to call it Dead End, but cul-de-sac in that time period.
Yeah.
And they always grew, his mom made rhubarb pies.
Rhubarb, yeah.
Uh-huh. And so we would go out a lot of times in the yard and strip it down and take salt or sugar or something and eat the rhubarb. But we never, and then there was the Coopers,
Yeah.
and we never had race problems or anything.
Jim Cooper, and was it Purcell?
Yeah, there was the Purcell and the Wilders.
Wilders, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it was just, different. And people said, well, didn't you experience all the racism? No.
Yeah.
Didn't, you really didn't. Mm-hmm.
And, you said you were harassed going from home to school or back, but within the school itself, did you feel that coming from West Ward, you were prepared to do what you needed to do as a student?
As a student,
Mm-hmm.
yes, they were. I think they were we were brought up where you got your lessons.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't say that for everybody. But I felt like we were fine, as far as, because we always studied together, and I raised my kids like that, and I think the only thing that I was not good at or knowledgeable enough was science, but back then, they didn't have a lot of, science classes for us.
Science, yeah.
And-
Your family, your dad, I know, was he a union steward or something in the?
He was the steward and financial secretary of the local union for years,
At the Mount.
at the Mount.
Okay. Now, what's the story of him and your mom? Where did they come from to get to Albion, and how did that come about?
Okay, I'll go with my dad's side because their family came first. My grandfather, Fred Lee, Senior, he was born in Pensacola, Florida. His father was a ship builder, and he had one sister. Well, my father's father is of German descent, and so he was a tall, big man, as you can see in the photos.
Mm-hmm.
And I think my Aunt Priscilla Ridley was the oldest. She was born in 1915. And then my Aunt Willa Mae, she was born in 1917. And then Uncle Oscar. And everybody knew Oscar back then because he was an auto salesman for Dick Scott behind the bank area.
Yeah.
And then Bob Fromm. Well, the next one was my dad. He was born in Albion in 1919.
Okay.
But Oscar, my dad, Fred Jr., he taught auto mechanics over at the Voed Center in Battle Creek.
Okay.
And most of them, he used to work for McDougal and Young at the coal yard.
Yeah.
Remember that well?
Yeah, because he delivered our coal.
Uh-huh.
When I was a kid, I always wanted to be Fred Lee.
Yes.
Yeah.
He used to be a boxer too. He was real good at it too, a middleweight.
All right, so your father was born here,
Uh-huh.
and I assume so he went to public schools here,
He went to school in Albion.
and
Mhm.
and then went to the mountain.
Yes. Mhm.
No military.
Yes, he went to, let me see, I was born in 42. My dad went to, was it World War II then?
Yeah.
He was in service. He didn't see any of the fighting, but he worked on the base.
Okay.
Mhm.
And your mom?
My mom, she was born in Macon, Georgia. The youngest at that time of 13 kids. I went down there to Macon in 85. And her grandfather's house is still standing. But the Hughes family still owns the property down there. And at that time, it was a 2-story home. There was a huge cemetery across the street, like across the street here. And they had all the land, and I met one of the ladies, and they didn't age down there. It was just amazing, because she was 105 then, and she was in a wheelchair. And I have a picture of her, but I recorded everything and wrote it all down. I mean, and I was just going at it, you know. And I went back and I called them back, and they kept asking me, do you want some land? You know, your mom has rights to so much land. Well, what happened in their family, okay, let's go back another gen, it would have been my great grandfather. Okay, his father was white. He was, had one son. And he married my grandmother, which is my mom's mother. And she was mulatto, you know, of mixed heritage. And then they had 8 kids, and then she died. And then she had 7 more. They believed in big families then. But like I said, one side was industrious, and the other side, the other brother's kids, 11, were teachers. So there's still some in Flint. We talked to them and everything else. Right now, most of them that came, they went to Pennsylvania. Some of the boys opened up a grocery store there. My mom said that the boys would get in a fight because their father would sit in front of the store and say, one guy went up to him and asked him, say, why do you let that little white man sit in front of your store? He said, that was his mom, his dad, and he popped him. But after that, you know, part of them moved to Michigan, and they ended up in Albion, and they were at 216 Washington Street. Was a 2-family house, and back then they didn't want black people to buy homes in that area. So this white man bought it for him, and he was able to live there because they didn't know exactly what nationality he was. And then the other ones, it just grew from there because the other girls, you know them by the name of John Birch Jr., Jack Birch, Jack's Janitorial, and one sister was Charles Jones, Bucky Jones, the mayor, and one of the other relatives was Mary Birch, the commissioner, and then you remember Greg Eaton.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And he's a lobbyist in Lansing. But everybody there was ambitious and industrious. Some stayed in Pittsburgh. And the biggest thing about them now is they all still work together. If somebody needs something, you know, they're always there.
Yeah. Well, getting back to West Ward,
Mhm.
Your overall impression looking back,
Mhm.
what would that be of the school?
Education-wise, I would say that was a good school. And that's taken out of the context, the condition of the building and all of that. But we received a good education.
I would agree.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And some of the kids, and just sidestepping, some of the kids today need an education like that. They need stern teachers. And like we all know, education begins at home. Mhm.
Yeah.
And so we got a gap, we got a lack
Yeah.
of what's going on now.
Right.
But I would tell anybody, West Ward, oh, that was a good days.
Yeah.
Very good days. Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You have questions?
Tell me more about your parents' story.
Well, I was one of the kids that they would say, go cut a switch. And that switch was for me.
Yeah.
I can remember my dad, I was like I say, the tomboy. I used to work on cars with my brother. My grandfather, when the Malibu started going south, you know, Florida and all of them, bringing people to work at the Malibu. Well, my grandfather was one of those that they brought up, but he never worked in the Malibu. He was such an excellent mechanic till he had a garage on Austin Avenue next to, is it Tisco store?
Yeah, right on the corner.
Right on the corner. And all he did was work on all the vehicles for the Malibu at that time. And then after he outgrew that, he moved down to Oak Grove. It was right down the road on Austin, going towards Marshall,
Okay.
where they had Quonset huts across the street.
Yes,
He
yes.
had a garage down there. And we would go out, he would give my Uncle Fred's son David and my brother Jimmy, myself, and we would go out on Saturday mornings to Grandpa's and work on cars. My father, he would be stern, and I would try him, and he would try me too. He would say, don't do this, and when he wasn't around, ain't nobody gonna know. Me and my brother got in a fight one day. He was always using me, and he made me mad, and I threw a rock at him, and I took the kitchen window out. So I know what stern is.
I had a
Well,
brother
mhm.
like, I had a brother like that.
Um,
In the last couple of years, the last African American teachers that were brought for the migration that came north at the time that your grandfather came, that opened the Westward School. Part of the argument there was to have a school where they could have African American teachers that they could relate to, because the kids that had come north hadn't had the experience of white teachers, and they thought that would be actually better. And then the day came when times changed as far as with the civil rights movement and everything. But we've just retired the last of the group of teachers that were brought north to teach here in Albion. And I'm just wondering if when you were at Westward, if you thought having that kind of racial connection to your teacher was of importance, or did it become not so important as you grew older?
Yeah, you know, we never thought about racism back then, because we knew we had friends. You know, when you grow up in a neighborhood that it's, even Bob will tell you, he used to live down the street, live next door. We never had the problems of the situations or things that, so it's hard for me to say it was this way or it was that way, when I might be sitting at your kitchen table and you might be over to my house spending the night.
Mm-hmm.
So racism, seems like it was just something, and it just appeared. It wasn't, if it existed, you know.
Well, part of it was the situation with the teachers themselves of being able to hire. So it existed on that level, because if they were going to have teachers, they had to be separate, and that was a northern thing as well.
Mm-hmm.
But part of the argument, as I understood it, was that the teachers would that the children would benefit and acclimate to the changes, the ones that were moving north. And of course, as time went by, then once it was established, and the arguments that the books weren't as good and that there were inequalities in the situation, and the national trials begin to come forth. I was just curious if you thought being able to have the role models mattered, or might there just as well have been, white teachers and black teachers? Do you think that added a comfort level for growing up? Or, I've read about it. I just don't know whether. Because
my parents going to school here, with my dad being born in Elgin and his siblings, if they were exposed to anything, they never talked about it. And then when we went to school, we always went to, like I say, we went to school. It was like a kids find walk to school together. One thing that I did notice I want to share is when we were growing up, my dad would never allow us to go across the railroad tracks. You live on this side of town, and this is, you associated with all of the people on this side of town. The only time that we went over there is when we were with him, going to Grandpa's or going to Aunt so-and-so's or something like that. So as far as experiencing all of that, because I say that too, because now I have friends that grew up in the South, and they'll say something to me, and I'll look at him, and and then they'll say, well, I'll say, well, what is that? And then they'll explain it to me, or something about food. And when you grow up in Michigan, even having a garden or anything, there was things that I just wasn't exposed to, and our parents would get up. My mom always fixed breakfast, and that was wonderful.
Yes.
But I mean, you don't want to sound like you're pleading ignorant, but you never had the exposure.
Now, to a large extent, we were sheltered and protected. Parents, for whatever they knew, they did not. We've heard 2 cases here just this morning. We were out of that loop, and it's not like we were sitting down at the table having discussions with grown-ups about grown-up things, and. So in that sense, we were sheltered, and we just did not encounter that.
Well, I guess part of my question is, I think at first they wanted the school to ease their children into the new situation, but after a while, it seems like there was once they were becoming acclimated and had friends in neighborhood, and because it was a very diverse neighborhood with particularly around that area and over around the Malibu, that it wasn't that so important anymore, maybe because they were relating on another level to all the cultures that were in the mix in their community. And so I'm just wondering, at what point did it go from protecting the children to being not fair?
I think what the value of that experience is we never experienced in that school a sense of not being important. It was we always had a sense that we were as good as anybody else, and they didn't have to say it. I mean, it wasn't like they harped on it, and we were told we had to do our best in order to be the best, and that we could do anything we put our minds to. And so there was never any defeatist conversation about, anything about your shortcomings. It was, you're a human being with all this potential, and the impression I had is that they pushed us
Yes.
to do maximum. And they didn't do it with a chip on their shoulder. It wasn't that attitude. It's just, this is the way things are. And you can do great things, but you must be prepared. And their job was to prepare. So, we never encountered any slights. But since we were taught that we were as good as anybody else, I don't think we went out feeling any different than that. And we did have all those informal contacts. Because when I lived next door to Betty, I mean, there was a white family across the street from both of our houses.
Well, all the conversations that we've heard since we started listening to people, and I've known and talked to people for a lot of years, when most of the students moved out of West Ward into the middle school or to the other schools, they didn't need,
Coddling.
yeah, they just simply went to a new school and
'Cause,
just
yeah,
started doing what all the other kids that same class year was doing.
And we knew each other because we played the other schools in sports. And so we had that contact. We had informal contacts at like the Masonic Temple where we could shoot pool, play ping pong and all that. So there were a lot of contact. And even on the west end of town, if you go all the way to the end on Gale Street and take a right, what is now the River Trail, there were a lot of Mexican American families that lived back there, as well as there were whites on West Cass Street at the far end when we first moved there, as well as over around on Gale. And so, even though the dividing line that you could say was Eden Street, and most blacks lived west of Eden Street, if not all. Even though all the blacks were over there, there were still whites and Mexican Americans that also lived over there. And we all walked past each other, coming and going to school or to downtown or whatever. So there was plenty of contact.
So the decision to change the school, would you think that was more that the school had worn out, that times had changed, and it was just time
To close it?
to go ahead and close it?
I've always tried to explain it as something that started out as voluntary self-segregation, but within 10 years, it was gradually becoming a case of forced discrimination, because that's when the building was starting to be run down, and the secondhand book thing. I would say within the first 10 years, Westmore was operating. That started to happen. And by the time we came on, I don't know if it was you or some other people, but people said they never recall getting brand new books. And so that discrimination was something that came about and led to another group of blacks saying, we need to be rid of this.
But it seems to have kind of been parents that were saying the kids over here,
Yeah,
the shiny
and I think
new
you'll
stuff.
notice from these conversations that adults' perception of things is nothing like ours. Because I've heard of people speak from an adult view, say the school was dark and gloomy, and none of the people, it just, and I think your explanation was great. You know, you're there with your friends, they had those, what, 10-foot windows? It's hard to be dark and gloomy with windows that big, even on a cloudy day. And the atmosphere was such, I think, that we all thought we didn't think it, we were having an enjoyable time. Yeah.
We couldn't wait to see each other, you know, it's
Yeah.
like our friends and everything else, and I think even at that time, if that school, I don't think it would be a problem with having it mixed at that time.
Yeah.
I think it would be, it might have helped the situation
Well, see,
versus, not.
those early pictures when that school was built, it was more Eastern European
Yes.
and all that great picture of the, and then the Dalrymple gets built and they close the West Ward, and then the African American community comes and they reopen it in order to accommodate
Oh, yeah, they
their
were wolf
understanding
on
that
short
they
space.
needed that they needed teachers that the students could be comfortable with. That's the way I've heard. And I just wonder if anybody has a gauge of when that shifted, when the attitudes of not needing their own teachers to.
Well, you know, I've heard one interview I did in the 70s, and of a person who was there, and he was saying that in that group of black leaders that went to lobby the school board were a couple of people who were teachers and couldn't work, and one had expected that if they made the conversion to an all-black school, he would probably have been the first principal. But of course, he was surprised when they went and hired Robert Cable from Chicago to come in to be the first principal. So there may have been some a personal agenda involved as well. And it just points to the fact that the segregation and discrimination that existed was more a matter of school board policy of not hiring blacks rather than the students themselves. Because, yeah, I mean, we had all kind of contact.
Very much so.
And in the beginning, the experience of the newly migrated African Americans was the South,
Right.
where when they went to school, they had black teachers.
Right.
And administrators would have been black in those
As
black
well.
schools. So this other component that you're describing, if continuing the professions, there was a vested interest for some to have an
Yeah.
African American school.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask Betty about other kinds of discrimination in Albion growing up. We hear about the movie theaters and Sullivan's Ice Cream Parlor, trying on clothes in stores. Any of those things resonate with your growing up?
Well, you know, it's amazing because my Aunt Priscilla, there used to be a store called Powers,
Oh,
a ladies store, and then there was Henry's Fashion that was at the corner. And I remember once, it was time for me to get a new winter coat. And my dad told me to go down to Henry's and pick out a coat. And I picked out a coat, tried it on and everything, and I went back and told my dad. And he went down and bought the coat. But I have never been told I couldn't try on clothes. We loved the Albion Theater. It was like if everybody got their schoolwork done, that's a must. You get that schoolwork done, you get your housework done. And on Saturdays, for 25 cents, you could get into the show, buy popcorn and something to drink. And we would sit in the chairs and with their legs crossed, because sometimes you might see a mouse running across. And it was always the cowboys or Tarzan or something, you know, the old westerns. And it was just, oh, I'd love to see those again. But, and then at the Bone Theater, we always had to sit upstairs. And when we roller skated, it was upstairs over Kroger's.
No, it's what's now a Sanders.
Sand, but
It
I
was
mean,
Gamble's.
was it Gamble? Gamble's back then.
Yeah.
You had your days you could roller skate. But we didn't have all the confusion in arguments and racism, you know, back in there. I just can't, and I'm not saying it's just to be saying it, but it's hard to say what, you know, like, because people have asked me, what do you think about black people? And I said, it's kind of hard for me to answer that, because if you come from any mixed heritage anywhere, you was not taught this.
Mhm.
You accepted everybody, and you learned to, you know, to accept people. There's some you just didn't deal with, you know, and that's in any race, but
Yeah.
there's some you don't deal with, but that was it.
Well, on another personal front, after high school, what was your direction and how did you get here today?
Okay, when I finished high school, in my class, I was one of the last ones to get married because I was 16 in the 12th grade. And coming out, and it was like, I asked my dad, can I join the Air Force? No, girls don't join the service. Okay? So I got married. There was no place for young married couples to go, and they had just finished the apartments on Broadwell. And it was like a village. Now that was a new village. And everybody would work or babysit for somebody. Well, I went to Argybright Business College and finished that. And Dick Weatherford, and I was working at McGraw-Edison as a secretary, and I said, oh, I don't like this. I did it for 2 years. Dick Weatherford came to me one day and he said, Betty, and in the meantime, before that, after that, I went to Kellogg's and got my associate's degree in business. Well, Eaton Corporation was blooming in Marshall, and they needed, they were trying to integrate, you know, the company. So I got a job over there with his help in purchasing. I ended up, you know, going back to college again, and I went to Nazareth College. That was the best education I ever had because I opted out. I wanted a college that had fewer classmates. Western was too big. The personal thing wasn't there that I was looking for. And I loved the nuns, and I learned so much there. And they had a way of, they didn't bang your hands or anything like that, but you got the message, and you got your homework done, and they were always through there. I went on after that, and they wanted, I could have went to Mexico with the company. And I ended up being an engineering buyer before I left there. And when as working there, I was on the county hazmat board, and then and on VOED Center, I was one of the parent advisors there. So I thoroughly enjoyed all of that. And then I traveled a lot with the company. Well, they had come and asked me if I would like to move to Mexico because they were opening up a new plant. And I said, they said, well, one thing we'll tell you, we'll move you there, but because of your wages in the United States versus wages in Mexico, big difference. You probably would never get another raise. So I declined that. And then they were coming through changing all of the management at the top. Because when I went there, it was like Eaton Allentown, then it went to Eaton Corp, and then it changed again and again and again. Well, they were giving people a buyout if they wanted it. Lorraine Gant used to work there with me. She was a secretary. And one of the general manager there, he came to me one day and he told me, he said, one of my best friends over there was Stahlberg, Morris Stahlberg. And he was a Jewish gentleman, but we got along fantastic. He was one of the people that came in and sell to the company and buy and whatever. And people would look at him because he would come in and he would have his work clothes on. And he'd always come up and talk to me. And one night, man asked me, why do you talk to that man? It's not the clothes. He was one of the richest people in Marshall. But when I was finishing up at college at Nazareth, I got a thing in the mail saying your education was paid for. They would never tell me who paid for it. And one of my best friend's father was president of Michigan National. I figured it had to be between them two. Somebody paid for it. But my thing is, and I wanted to say, when I was in high school, when they started this thing about students being on the city council, I was one of the first ones to be on city council. I still have a photo of that someplace. And it's like you're destined to do something, but when you're young, you don't know, but you can work towards various things. And I'm retired now from auto owners insurance. This is my second year. And I moved up there. And right now, I do volunteer work. I help people with his insurances and any questions. And right now, my big thing is, on city council, not city council, but board review and zoning boards and all of these various things. And what I'm going to do, continue working on my family history. We're going to charter a bus this fall for the relatives on the Hughes side. And we're going to start, and we're going to go to Dexter, Georgia, Macon, Georgia, and spend a whole week down there. And that'll be the Birches, the Hugheses, the Pearsons, the Eatons,
Yeah.
And we figured if we did it that way, we could stop at all these various places. Instead of having to fly here and rent a car, have somebody drive us, because we're all getting too old to go down the highway.
Yeah.
But I think the young people today miss a lot,
Yeah.
a heck of a lot. And there's so much out there for them. But education, you need it.
I think you came right up to the
End of the
second.
tape.
Yep.
Excellent.
Thanks.
This was great.
Appreciate your
Mm-hmm.
appreciate your love of history.
Yes, yes.